distinguished scholars, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to extend greetings and welcome to every participant of this online panel discussion of international and interdisciplinary conference, Challenges of Source Evaluation in Science and Correlated Areas. This is the fourth online panel discussion that we are having in the frameworks of this conference. And this time it is dedicated to citing scientometric databases. And my name is Kanykei, and it's an honor to be your moderator on this panel. And let me please present our speakers in the order they are given the floor on this panel. Dr. Lucien Oulahbib, writer, lecturer, sociologist, political scientist. He is the chief editor of scientific journal Dogma. Dr. Lucien spent many years working together with French thinker Jean Baudrillard. He is an author of numerous scientific papers and books on French nihilism and neo-Leninism, radical Islamism, anti-Americanism, and anti-Semitism. We welcome you, Dr. Lucien Oulahbib. The next speaker is Professor Maxim Lepskiy, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, Chair of the Department of Sociology and Administration at Zaporozhye National University. Professor Lepskiy is the head of Research Board and Social Forecasting of Sociological Association of Ukraine and academician of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. We welcome you, Professor Lepskiy. Iryna Lopatiuk, Associate Fellow of Ukraine Academy of Sciences and the Memory Institute, member of the Special Scientific Unit Expeditionary Corps. She is a chairman of Odessa Historic Literature Scientific Society and secretary of Psychological and Philosophical Scientific Society. We welcome you, Iryna Lopatiuk. Dr. Vladimir Skvorets, Doctor of Philosophy, Associate Professor, Head of the Department of Sociology at Zaporozhye National University, author of 115 scientific and methodological publications, among them 2 monographs, The Life of People as Social Phenomena, Transformation of the Socio-Historical Organism of Ukraine, Analytics of Social Processes. We welcome you, Professor Skvorets. Ph.D. Oleksandr Sahaidak, Head of Theorung Association. He is a psychologist, Jungian analyst, hypnologist, academician, expert in anthropology and sociology. He is a chairman of the Psychological Philosophical Scientific Society at the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. We welcome you, Professor Sahaidak. At the beginning of this meeting, please allow me to tell briefly about an important aspect such as breaks. We are not going to have officially any breaks. However, at any point of time, as long as you are not the speaker, you can grab a glass of water if you need or use the bathroom. Just make sure that your microphone is off. As for the format of this panel, every speaker is given 8 minutes to present his speech. If you are going to extend this amount of time, the moderator is going to kindly ask you to stop or wrap up your speech in 1 minute. And the first question of today's panel discussion is it obligatory to reference other scholars in conducting a research? The problem of ecclesiasticism in science. And the floor is given to Dr. Lucien Oulahbib. Please. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Oh, it's a difficult question. I suppose it's obvious. To understand the other scientists, to learn, of course. But if you have some interest, specific interest, and you consider that the other scientists are not the same of point of view, it's necessary to follow your own path, because It depends, of course, the field, the object, but like a friend said to me, sometimes you have une science by object. Yeah. What is a science? It depends about the object you follow, you want to analyze. It's why if you are a specialist, for instance, about a very narrow picture object, necessary you cannot to wait any support about the other scientists, and especially if you are the sole, you are alone in this object. We have many examples in the science historics, or you have just 2, 3 persons who works about this kind of object, and the other person are very didn't understood what do you work. For instance, but I have in my thought about the relativity, for instance. You have Einstein, you have Poincaré in France, you have 2, 3 scientists, but the other scientists didn't understand anything about the complexity of the connection between space and time, the, the Einstein reflection about the universe expansion is very new at this time. It's not necessary to return to Galileo time, but I suppose now we have the same problem also, because it is very difficult to be a precursor to find some new object, to find to resolve, to have new solutions. For instance, in France, for example, about sociology, perspective, analyze the society now, the objects, the production of the image, picture, network, etc., etc. For instance, Jean Baudrillard, the Jean Baudrillard thought has always a lot of difficulties to be understood in the French university, for instance. But in the English or American and Australia university, Baudrillard is now very understandable, very new, like you in Ukraine. But in France, it's very difficult because we have not the same paradigm, the same model. It's why you don't follow the Baudrillard thought, and you abandon his own kind of analyze, and you follow, for instance, Bourdieu, Foucault, the analyze of domination, concept of domination, of concept of powerful, and you abandon the perspective to analyze the fact that it's not easy to reduce the complexity of modern society as a just domination. It's more complex of that, but it's why it's necessary to stay alone if you consider it's not possible to share your in the mainstream, for instance, your thought is necessary to pursue your own path, and to try to organize some links with a few people.
Dear Dr. Lucien Oulahbib, the time is over for the first question. You will be able to continue and answer the second question. And now I would like to give the floor. If you want, you can wrap up in 1 minute the conclusion, Dr. Lucien. Would you like to?
No,
Is it fine? All right. Then we give the floor to Professor Maxim Lepskiy, please. We give the floor to Professor Maxim Lepskiy.
Приветствую. Ну, во-первых, я хотел бы поблагодарить наших коллег за такую интересную панель, интересную проблематику, которую мы обсуждаем. Вот. И уточнить один момент. Вы меня представили как декан, я уже давно не декан, я просто профессор факультета социологии и управления. Теперь хочу познакомить со своими тезисами, которые касаются первого вопроса. Необходимо ли цитировать других ученых? Здесь я вижу очень серьезную проблему в таком очень простом вопросе.
So, greetings, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank organizers of the conference for preparing such an interesting online panel for the discussion. And I would like to share my theses for the first question, which is it obligatory to reference other scholars in conducting a research?
Во-первых, цитирование других авторов – это предполагает знание исторического материала, как развивалась наука, какие этапы проходила в той или иной проблематике.
First of all, when we are speaking about referencing to other colleagues, this the idea itself, it presupposes that a person already knows the different historical stages of how science was retransformed in the course of the time.
Как в свое время говорил прекрасный философ Мамардашвили, часто другие философы живут только из-за того, что мы помним их идеи и знаем о их достижениях.
As one of the greatest philosophers, Mamardashvili, told once that most of the philosophers, they keep on living just because people, we all remember their ideas.
Это один полюс проблемы. Второй полюс проблемы, на мой взгляд, это все-таки вопрос о симуляции и гиперреальной научной деятельности, когда цитирование – это обязательный критерий, без содержательный, а формальный.
So what I've said, I think, is one side of the coin, and the other, I think, is the simulativeness and hyper-reality of this referencing idea. which became something like a formality, which is not about the content and the referencing itself, but referencing for the sake of referencing.
С одной стороны, когда институционально молодой ученый, аспирант приходит в совет, то ему говорят, обязательно нужно цитировать членов совета или те, кого уважают в совете.
So what is commonly accepted is that a young scientist comes to the board and he is told that he should reference people that are in the board, people that are respected by the board.
С одной стороны, действительно, как может человек защищаться, если другие люди некомпетентны в этой проблематике?
And from the other side, certainly it's illogical to even think how can one defend his theses, his ideas, if other people that are reviewing him are not competent in the first place in the topic that he is presenting.
С другой стороны, это вопрос ритуализации и попытки все-таки проявить излишние какие-то внимания к положениям авторов, которые, может быть, даже и не касались проблематики, изложенной в работе аспиранта.
And on the other side, the referencing thing, it becomes a kind of ritualization and an attempt to spend too much of attention to authors that are in fact do not have that much specialization in the subject which is under the discussion of a certain young scholar.
На этом же симуляционном полюсе находятся и те группы ученых, которые создают локальные сообщества, цитирующих друг друга бессодержательно, без желания сделать что-то новое в науке.
The other part of simulativeness of referencing in specific cases is when a specific group of scholars, they come together and start citing each other, meaning without meaning. So just for the sake of, again, referencing to each other.
Тогда это уже не наука, а что-то подобное кружку вязания на спицах, где люди занимаются исключительно любимым делом.
And in such a case, if we are confronting or seeing a group of so-called scholars that are referencing each other for the sake of it, then it is not science, it is not academia anymore. This is something like a group of people that are pursuing their own interests that could be art or doing other different things, but it is not academia.
И вот в этих двух полюсах находится то, что называется научной культурой. И уровень человека и ученого связано, к какому полюсу этот человек тяготеет.
And between these two extremes that I have described, we have so-called academic culture, and we can decide or we can evaluate the level of a scholar by looking at to what kind of values and principles he adheres to.
Но критерием остается, на мой взгляд, по-прежнему результативность тех научных открытий, тех новых закономерностей, которые все-таки ученый предлагает научному сообществу, да и обществу в целом.
However, in a nutshell, I think that the main criteria which is worthy of consideration should be the efficiency and the practicality of the discovery of a scientist, which he is presenting to the society in general and to the academic community.
Одновременно попытки научную культуру перевести исключительно в культуру грамматики, пунктуации, запятых и исправления исключительно ошибок – это характеристика все-таки дисциплинарных практик, нежели обучение молодых ученых держать марку и изначально писать понятно, доступно и ясно, как говорил в свое время Декарт.
And also, I think that when academic culture in general is brought to the point when it becomes a grammatically obsessed, editing obsessed, punctuation obsessed kind of sphere, that is not science anymore, because it's about dealing with disciplinary type of different things and not about bringing up young scholars.
Безусловно, люди должны обладать грамотностью, как философской, как научной, так и языковой, но все-таки оцениваются прежде всего открытия и результаты. Вот, пожалуй, те тезисы, с которыми я хотел поделиться.
Needless to say, I do believe that one has to be eligible, one has to be knowledgeable of philosophical standards. He has to have a certain foundation to even be considered as a young scholar. However, we should not forget that the essence and the substance of a scientific research, the result of his scientific work, is much more important than the other criteria that are auxiliary. Thank you, Professor Maxim Lepskiy, for your speech. And now we are giving the floor to Iryna Lopatiuk, please.
Thank you so much. First of all, let me share my sheer gratitude with all of you, dear experts. Today, it's not like a very specific panel. Actually, to be honest, it's kind of very hard event. Since the two questions, the two distinctive issues we are to discuss here, they are strikingly and ridiculously, let me say, dissatisfying issues that still somehow are present in contemporary science. In short, I am that very person who Professor Lepskiy was also speaking about. I am that very young scientist that actually is from one hand very exhilarated about the science. I love this thing. Science is like the sense of my life, part of it actually. But on the other hand, I just feel literally dissatisfied with all the things and all the obstacles and barriers that are actually artificial. In short, providing you with the answer to whether it is necessary to quote and refer to certain things or it is not, I should say that first of all, we have to divide the scientific research into two parts. Like, part number one, this is a preliminary part, and part number two, this is the scientific research itself. So when we're speaking about certain applied science approach, if we're dealing with the preliminary part, we should actually look everywhere. We should actually study the initial or primary resource and find out people who lived before, and maybe somehow they were researching the topic we are so much concerned of. But this is not the scientific research itself. This is only, let me say, the first issue, the first step, helping you to broaden your mind, helping you to see the ideas that were present in this world, helping you to realize your possible impact, the thing you should do, helping one to shape his objectives in his research, like that. However, this is just the first very step and issue. This is not the research, and that's the main point. The second point I would definitely love to be emphatic about is that very issue when people are trying to distort the methodology of scientific research. Right now, there are in science certain types of rules. They are never written anywhere. You'll never find out any specific document with like rule number 1, rule number 2, rule number 3. It's not like that. Somehow still there are certain so-called rules you should or even must be aware of and you should follow. And this is the rule of referring to the previous people or referring to people who you are somehow maybe in future will be, let me say, dealing with or speaking with or even communicating with, or maybe not, who knows. Still, this is so-called unspoken rule or even a stereotype that breaks the young researcher into pieces and really stops him. It's like losing appetite while you're eating, even the most delicious food. Because when you see that there are certain rules and you do not understand the reason for this rule's existence, you just feel like you don't need to do this research anymore. What for? The most dangerous thing about all these quotations and all these clubs and all these references is in the following thing. There are so many artificial mechanisms when certain people, even scholars, are trying to persuade the majority with certain explorations, discoveries, because actually this is like the political business project. There is, like, you know, certain people who are interested in making, let me say, a new school, like a new fencing school. They're making a business project, and that involves scholars. And then it's like the task. You should verify that the school that we need is a very ancient and a very good school. What do we need for that verification? Of course, we need sources, we need documents, we need books, biographies, monographies, even ancient treatises. And there are people who are actually, well, I don't know whether they have any sort of consciousness, and I don't know how they're sleeping at night, but they don't think about these issues. They just create artificial treatises. They just create fake information, fake resources, and they always are working in a group. Let me say like 10 people group, like. And then professor number one in that group, he quotes the artificial fake things made or produced by professor number two. Professor number two does the same with the fake information provided by professor number three. Then special websites are created. Today in the 21st century, it's not a big issue of making a special forum, platform, website in order to publish your own results of research. All the things has been spread around the world, and finally the simulacra that we're facing, that is some sort of great or grandiose school that actually was somewhere by the end of 16th century, and here are the documents we are so much eager to show you. Actually, this is just the show that is based on that very mechanism of necessity to refer to certain scientists, to refer to certain opinion pluralism, and the other things. So definitely I'm concerned of the following conclusion. First of all, there is nothing bad about knowing and being aware of people who actually tried to research the field you're so much concerned about, and you're going to make your own research. However, I do not feel like it's any ideal mechanism or even necessary mechanism to build your research upon. You have to know what the other people do. Why? Because your own research results should be better than the previous ones. And if you don't know the main objective of your research, if you're not concerned about, let me say, methodology, about any verification instruments, and you're just quoting or referring to the people and somehow making like a mix, like a salad mix from your scientific research, well, you know, it's not research. Everyone today is concerned of two issues, like the issue of using Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V. Like you're copying something and you're pasting, and then you're making like a new pie. However, who's gonna eat that pie? It's not a scientific research. It's fake, useless, and very cheap production. And unfortunately today, we're facing too many projects like that. And they are both business projects, political projects, etc. And only these two types of project that somehow are still present in science, and it's very, let me say, famous thing today to be scientifically verified by someone. And all these types of project, they actually bring and raise these very unspoken rules. Thank you so much for your attention. Actually, this was my subjective opinion. That's my perspective. These are the things I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Iryna Lopatiuk. And we give the floor to Professor Sahaidak, please. Вас не слышно. Профессор Sahaidak, пожалуйста, включите микрофон.
Прошу прощения. Итак, коллеги, добрый вечер. Или день, у кого как.
Good evening, dear colleagues, or maybe good day.
Продолжая тему о важности или вредоносности цитирования, что необходимо сказать? Во-первых, мы с вами знаем, что наука – это специфический социальный институт, и его специфичность, она настолько особенно уникальна, что есть, пожалуй, только еще один социальный институт, который можно уподобить науке, и его с ним постоянно сравнивают. Это религия.
So talking about the importance or maybe the harmfulness of the citing, we know that when we talk about science, this is very special social institute, and this specificity is really unique. And we know another one institute that can be paralleled to the science. It is actually religion.
Оба этих социальных института специфичны прежде всего своим положением относительно базового социального института государства.
And talking about these specific social institutes, they are unique because of the position referred to the basic social institute, which is state.
И в чем особенность этого положения? С одной стороны, и наука, и религия очень востребованы государством.
And what is the future of this position? We can say that state really needs the science and the religion.
И, как мы знаем из истории, на протяжении тысяч и тысяч лет государство пыталось взять под контроль и науку, и религию.
And as we all know, for 1,000 years, every time, in every periods of the time, the state tried to control the science, the religion.
С другой стороны, и наука, и религия могут выполнять свои функции социальных институтов, я имею в виду эффективно, с пользой для общества, лишь в том случае, если они будут достаточно независимыми и автономными, прежде всего от государства.
And on the other hand, we see the situation when we talk about science and religion, they can perform their functions of social institutes only when they are independent from the state.
Эта автономность и независимость, она достигается, опять-таки, исходя из истории, многими методами.
And talking about this autonomy and independence of these social institutes, it is achieved with different type of methods.
И одним из наиболее важных методов такой автономности науки от государства, несомненно, является своего рода корпоративизм, то есть своя внутренняя культура, свои внутренние ценности, даже, можно сказать, своя внутренняя идеология.
And one of these methods of autonomy from the state is some so-called cooperativism. And we talk here about their own culture, their own value, and their own ideology.
И разумеется, что формирование каких-то собственных традиций, преемственности, в том числе и ссылок на авторитеты, это одна из составляющих вот этой вот корпоративности, которая дает автономность науке.
And also, we can say that this formation of traditions and reference to some kind of authorities, this is actually the method that makes this corporatism and that makes this independence.
Но с другой стороны, как сказал наш замечательный наставник Леопольд Сонди, патология есть гипертрофированная норма.
And from the other hand, as a matter of psychology, Leopold Sondy said, pathology is hypertrophied norm.
И когда тенденции к такой корпоративности, внутренней автономности уже приобретают тенденции олигархичности,
And also, when we face the situation with these corporate tendencies, they already have tendencies to oligarchism.
То тогда получается, что наука сама для себя создает те же проблемы и ограничения, от которых она пытается избавиться в непростых отношениях с государством.
So, as a result, we see that the science itself creates some kind of problems and some kind of barriers that it actually tried to remove from the state. But right now, they create by themselves.
Когда те процессы, методы, которые призваны обеспечить самостоятельность науки, превращаются уже в нечто ритуальное, то они как раз и лишают науку самостоятельности.
When such methods are designed to ensure independence, become some kind of ritual, they make the situation when the science lose this independence.
И если наука является, относительно, конечно, независимой от государства, но при этом начинает зависеть от своего собственного внутреннего бюрократизма, то для перспектив науки это ничем не лучше.
And also we can say that if science is independent from the state, but at the same time it begins to be dependent from the bureaucracy of the science, so this is nothing good for the science.
Поэтому здесь необходимо даже не столько умение, сколько искусство, которым должны быть наделены ученые тоже, проскользнуть между пресловутыми Сциллой и Харибдой и найти золотую середину.
So right now we can say that what is needed is not the skill, but actually some kind of master, some kind of art that can be... Чтобы найти что? Прошу прощения.
Золотую середину.
In order to find a golden mean.
Thank you.
Вот я полагаю, что именно такая задача стоит перед нами, как перед учеными относительно вот этого вот явления. Что такое ссылки на авторитеты и как нам следует к ним относиться.
And as for me, I think that this is actually our task that we have to resolve about citing and about reference to the authority people in the science. We have to solve it in order to make the science better.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your speech, Professor Sahaidak. You were right on time. It was 8 minutes sharp. So now I would like to give the floor to Professor Skvorets, and please don't forget about the limit of time in 8 minutes, please.
Уважаемые коллеги, я приветствую ваше участие на этой интересной дискуссии.
Good evening, dear colleagues, in this discussion of this panel.
На вопрос о ссылках ученого на источники я не могу дать однозначный ответ.
Talking about the reference to some kind of source, I cannot say the total opinion.
Ну, во-первых, в науке есть такие процессы, как наследственность. То есть, да.
First of all, I have to say that the science has certain processes, such as heredity.
Это означает, что каждое новое научное знание, гипотеза, теория, концепция, они создаются на основе уже ранее существующих теорий и концепций путем критики и переосмысления.
And what I want to say, it is actually that each new scientific knowledge, some kind of discovery, hypothesis or theory or some kind of work based on the previously existing ones, hypotheses, theories, and so on, and made by criticism.
Говоря о требовании ученого ссылаться на источники, на других авторов, мы должны понимать роль этого феномена. То есть он нацеливает на формирование культуры научной деятельности.
And talking about this requirement for the scientists to reference to the sources of the previous authorities in science, we must understand that this is actually a very important role of such phenomenon. And it has its certain aim of shaping culture in research.
Когда мы смотрим статьи, особенно молодых начинающих ученых, то по характеру использования источников в этих работах, мы можем, по характеру ссылок, мы можем видеть то, что как ученые отражают достижения других авторов, и видеть, что создано самим этим автором, что привнесено им в науку нового.
And when we read some new articles of the youngsters, of the young fellows and scholars, we see how they make these references to the previous authorities. And we see how these young scientists reflects the achievements of the other authors. And also he made something new in this research and some discovery. And we see it in their work.
Я думаю, что в силу указанного обстоятельства ссылка на источники молодых и начинающих ученых должна быть обязательным требованием.
I personally think that the reference to the sources of previous authorities is very important, and it has to be a requirement for the young scientists.
Вместе с тем мне приходилось встречать высококачественные труды ученых, обществоведов, в которых нет ссылок на источники.
But at the same time, I have to pay your attention to the fact that I have met high quality works of different scientists that didn't reference to anybody at all.
Ну, пример мы можем привести известного мыслителя современности Александра Зиновьева, в частности, там его несостоявшийся проект «Зияющие высоты» и другие произведения.
And just such an example, I want to share with you the work of thinker Oleksandr Zinoviev, and he had a work, some kind.
Несостоявшийся проект.
And yes, and he has a project which didn't become to the end, but anyway, it has a name, something like Gaping Heights, and some other projects as well.
Ну и хочу поделиться своими такими прекрасными впечатлениями. Другого такой работы – это статья Олега Викторовича Мальцева и Дарины Коруны из этого прекрасного коллектива в журнале «Гранит науки», которая называется «Связь Якова Блюмкина с современной академической наукой».
And the other example that I want to share with you, and I had a very good impression about this work, this is the work of my colleagues, Dr. Maltsev and Darina Karuna, which is a journalist in the journal Granite of Science. And the name of this article was Connection of Yakov Blumkin in the modern scientific circles.
В этой статье нет прямых ссылок на источники, но присутствуют фотографии действующих лиц, то есть как источники, и фотографии документов.
I can say that this article doesn't have certain references, but at the same time it has photographs of such people, of the characters that were involved in this situation, and also the photographs of documents, which is actually can be sources.
Но самое главное, что в этой статье разработана концепция, новая, оригинальная концепция возникновения советской науки.
And the most important that this article has developed a new concept, new and original concept about emergence of Soviet science.
Авторы статьи показали, как борьба двух ученых, прекрасных ученых, выпускников Гейдельбергского университета, Яковлева и Попова, против околонаучных проходимцев Блюмкина, Бокия, привела к тому, что определила путь развития советской науки, ту модель, которую приобрела наука, и ее будущее.
And this article is about two very good scientists from the Heidelberg University. They have names Yakovlev and Popov, and they were both against we can say so, not scientific people such as Blumkin and Bokin. They were not scientific, but they try to pretend that they are scientists. And actually this fight, we can say so, determined the path of development of Soviet science, the model of Soviet science, and the future of the science.
И, наконец, хочу сказать, что эта проблема, разработанная в статье, она чрезвычайно актуальна для современного украинского общества.
And I also want to say that this problem that was described in this article is very specific for the modern situation in the Ukraine when we speak about scientific circles.
Yes, Professor Skvorets, please, your time is over. Can you please summarize what you wanted to say in 1 minute?
Thank you.
В течение 1 минуты, пожалуйста, суммируйте, что вы хотели бы сказать. Благодарю.
Современная украинская наука находится под влиянием двух противоположных сил. Тех, кто пытаются ее развивать, поднимать, вести по пути прогресса, и геростратов-разрушителей, которые ее разрушают. Спасибо за внимание.
So what we can say about modern situation in the Ukrainian science, we see two paths, two opposite forces. The one force is try to develop Ukrainian science, but at the same time, the other force is try to waste everything that science in Ukraine has. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear speakers. And now we are moving to our next question of the panel. 1 moment. And the second question of today's panel is, do scientometrics databases have any relation to science? Could it be that they were invented for reasons that do not relate to science? Please comment on issues with Scopus in the US and Web of Science in Europe. Dr. Lucien Oulahbib, the floor is given to you. Please unmute yourself.
But I don't understand really the question. What is your purpose?
You didn't understand the question?
Yes.
Oh, so the question is that in modern, currently in these days, we ended up having different scientometric databases. For instance, Scopus, Web of Science, there are a lot of them. And sometimes people might think that a scientist is somebody who has a lot of articles in the index journals.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't have them, it might be like that he's not a serious scientist. But for instance, if he writes books and monographs, they are actually even more broad and more important than just an article, because one article doesn't allow you to broaden the whole topic of the research. It only covers a small topic. And so the question is about, do the scientometric databases like Scopus, Web of Science, and many others, I don't know all the titles, but there are a lot of them, do they have a relation to science, or is it more of a political issue, more of maybe even economical one? So could you please comment on this issue? What do you think about scientometric databases and their relation actually to academia, to science?
I understood. I suppose it's both. It's both. It's political issue, and also it's about your capacity to find some results, efficient results. For instance, about the actual crisis in the healthy about COVID-19, for instance. In France, we have a great scientist. The name is Didier Raoult. He's very among the 10 infectiologist scientists in the world. Is maybe not. We have among the 10, maybe Didier Raoult. He's second. I don't know exactly, but in France, a lot of other scientists, by jealousy or by concurrence between Paris and Marseille, between two towns, big town, historic background in France, so on. Raoult is in a minority, has a minority position because he fight for a treatment, a precocity treatment, etc. I don't go in the details, but just I said, like Iryna said, also Oleksandr said later, earlier, sorry, you have a lot of adversaries and in many fields and many sorts of adversaries and perhaps enemies, not just concurrents, etc. It's why the solution for me about this kind of thing, because it's not about reputation, it's not about your capacity to publish in the fantastic review. For instance, you have Lancet. In the Lancet, against Raoult, the Lancet is very famous review, international review. They made, like Iryna said earlier, they made a fake review, a fake science, a fake what is analyze to destroy the Raoult proposition, and not just Raoult. You have Zelenko in United States, etc. So you have other scientists. It's why I suppose it's necessary to make like the in the science history science, you have to organize yourself in the pole. For instance, you had 50 years ago, you had the Circle of Vienne. You have Popper, Karl Popper, Wittgenstein, you have Carnap, Vienna Circle, you have Frankfurt School, you have also in Oxford, in United States also, you have, it's necessary to organize in the between real scientists a poll, a mall with a review, like you made right now. Right now, you made the real science for me. Right now, you organize, you polarize, and you influences. You become some. Network able to influence younger scientists, and it's why it's political. You have the heavy, the capacity to have heavy influence inside not just some field, but in public opinion also. It's very necessary to have a big influence in the new network, etc. I don't know if I have time, Kanykei. I have time. Or
Yeah, you have at least 2-3 minutes.
Okay. It's why the science for me is eternal crisis. You know the book, you saw book, the European crisis. It's usual. In every time you have controversy, you have opposition. For instance, in the psychology, the fact between Adler, Freud, Jung, why it's astonishing always when I was younger, why Adler and Freud become some enemies, why Freud become enemies about Pierre Janet in France. You have a lot of controversy, and it's normal. It's a normal situation, like Oleksandr said earlier. The critics is necessary, the controversy, and it depends how result. If we have some efficient results for the modern problems about the consumerism, about the analyze a new society, about different fields. If you have a very good results, the time works with us, and it's why it's necessary to be patient for the young like Iryna. I understand very much your position, but you have not to wait the reconnaissance, what is the term exactly? The people recognize your work. It's not necessary. You work. You have some friends, you have some sympathizers, you have some other scientists very near your analyze, and you have to pursue your path, even if you dislike some people dislike you. It's no matter necessary to organize and to polarize and to be political. For me is that to organize the better network of the better scientists in the world. It's
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Oulahbib. Thank you. And now we are giving the floor to Iryna Lopatiuk, please.
Really, thank you. So first of all, let me thank to our dear expert, Professor Lucien Oulahbib. Thank you so much for your sheer, let me say, recommendation. That's great, actually, to receive these recommendations from you, from such people who actually knew Baudrillard and used to work with Baudrillard. You know, he's like the last prophet of Europe. He's the greatest and the most prominent philosopher from my personal viewpoint. However, right now I'm obliged to answer the second question of our online panel, and I would love to share several conclusions. Actually, this is my personal conclusions, and I dare announce some of them. First of all, since I was raised in the best applied science tradition, this is the tradition of applied science that was founded by Yakovlev and Popov and many, many other scientists. Today, I should say I'm honored to be the scientist who was raised by Oleg Maltsev, Doctor of Philosophy. He is the successor of the ideas of Yakovlev and Popov. And secondly, I should say that actually concerning all these issues with Web of Science or Scopus, I should say this has nothing to do with your quality of scientific research, of the things you are doing as a scholar or as a scientist. And let me explain the reason I'm claiming these things so far. Now, I'd love to, let me say, I'd love to paraphrase the things that are floating from my heart in a way of a story. So let me tell you a short story. Let's pretend that all together we're going somewhere to the library. Why are we going to the library? Because we want to become better, want to become smarter, we want to know something. And then we realize, oh my goodness, in the country where we live in, there are no good libraries. And if there are no good libraries, there are no good sources, no, let me say, sophisticated and significant information. And this lack of information, this is the problem number one. And let's pretend, just hypothetically, that somehow we're realizing that raising your own generation of scholars, it takes too much time. It's so much better to use somehow the other scholars who are living outside in the other countries. But, you know, involving the other scholars means a lot of money. Of course, I have some money, but I don't want to spread all my money for that sake. That's why I am organizing a project. And I'm trying to involve lots of scientists into this project, because this project is like a guarantee of your reputation, of your future communication with the other external great journalists and scholars, and so on and so on. You know, it's like, let me say, a permission into a certain circle of people you never see. And it's like a promise that you will have some better life, better conditions, and some better, let me say, possibilities to conduct the research. And actually, this sort of project involves people who want to share their works. And the most interesting thing, that these scholars are sharing their works for free, just because they want the world to know what they have done. The other people who are eager to help sharing for free, all this so-called charity organization, creates a huge library. And this is step number one. Step number two, there is a hierarchy in that library, and you can take the better place in that hierarchy. For that, you should compete a little bit and pay just a little bit of money. And then this political instrument takes its place and the competition begins. What do we have as a result? We have a special platform that actually is just like a library or archive. And the main connotation is as follows: archive or library doesn't equal the content of your scientific piece, and it doesn't even has nothing to do with the meaning of your work, of your discovery, of things you have done. It is just a library. It is just one statistical sentence saying that you have done something. That was just the beginning. Today, Scopus and Web of Science, these are the platforms where lots of people believe, many scholars believe, because they are told by some seniors that you should actually register there and you should actually publish your works there, because just in case you do not publish your works there in Web of Science platform or Scopus platform, you are not a scientist at all. Let me kindly remind you that science is the field that is actually pretty ancient one. And it existed like maybe 2,000 years ago, maybe 5, no one knows for sure. And 2 or 3 or 5,000 years ago, science lived happily without any archives or libraries or scopuses or anything else. And we are proud to have such great and prominent figures like Aristotle, like Plato, like Giordano Bruno, like Giambattista Vico, like Alexei Yakovlev, Grigory Popov, and the others. So again, we should not allow the other people distort our perception of the impact of scientific research. That every scientific research the person does serves for certain task implementation. In case your research doesn't help to live better, to implement your tasks, to receive the results, then it's senseless. Maybe it is like some sort of theoretical step that might help someone, but today, if it doesn't help you, still you have to improve yourself, you have to do better, you have to put much more effort, etc. But you should never stop yourself from, let me say, saying, oh my goodness, I'm not registered somewhere in the Web of Science platform or Scopus platform. However, I am going to conclude myself. I realize that actually this story about Scopus and Web of Science, actually that story started with good reasons and good intentions. However, everything that is good is usually retransformed and paraphrased by certain political agencies and the other guys who are just interested in everything for free. And today we're having what we have. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Iryna Lopatiuk. And we give the floor to dear Professor Maxim Lepskiy. Please.
Спасибо за предоставленное слово. И мне бы хотелось поделиться, как я воспринимаю эту проблему. Я изначально говорю о том, что это мое личное мнение, оно может не совпадать с мнением других ученых или людей, которые изучают эту проблематику.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And in the first place, I would like to note that I'm going to share my own personal opinion, which might not necessarily be in coherence with the opinion of my colleagues or of people that do research this problematic.
Первый момент, который связан с отношением к этим наукометрическим базам, связано, наверное, с тем аспектом, который говорил и уважаемый Oulahbib Lucien, профессор.
And the first aspect that I'm going to discuss about scientometric basis is probably also related to what Dr. Lucien Oulahbib just spoke about.
Это связано прежде всего с созданием и общением в сети ученых. И тогда такие наукометрические базы, по идее, должны служить удобству ученого в поиске информации и литературы.
In the first place, scientometric databases, I do believe that in some cases they are used for the purpose of creating a network in the web, which would play a role of a certain platform for scholars to communicate with each other. And if that is the case, then it should be a place to distribute and exchange pieces of knowledge.
Но мы уже сталкивались с первой частью, это сетевым неравенством ученых, поскольку критерием отбора часто является наличие финансовых средств для того, чтобы оплатить публикацию в Web of Science или в Scopus.
However, the first dilemma that we already faced in this modern academic mainstream world is that when it comes to web and internet, we are facing the inequality of different scholars. For instance, from financial viewpoint, because sometimes a scholar might not have simply a money to get published in a certain journal which is indexed in Scopus or Web of Science.
В сильных развитых странах для этого существуют фонды для ученых, где оплачиваются подобные публикации.
And certainly in some countries that are dedicated to this kind of, to the proliferation of this side of young scholars, they have a certain funds allocated that are given to young scholars.
В части украинских вузов тоже пытаются это оплатить и создают группы 4-5 человек, которые публикуют для того, чтобы снизить эту финансовую нагрузку.
Particularly in Ukraine, they're also trying to introduce this type of practice, and they try to form the group of 4 or 5 people and fund them so that they have an opportunity to publish their works in an indexed journal.
В результате отсекается часть ученых, которые занимаются своим интересным делом, но не готовы публиковаться в рейтинговых журналах по финансовой части.
And as a result of this practice, some of the scientists, they're just left off simply for the reason they do not have those financial resources to get published in the journal. However, they are conducting the research which is relevant. Just because of their situation, they just do not get published.
Я не могу точно утверждать, верна эта информация или нет, но я встречал утверждение, что по доходности Scopus стоял между нефтяным бизнесом и рекламным бизнесом.
So what I'm going to say right now, I don't know if it's 100% true, but what I've heard is that Scopus, when it comes to their financial income and yearly turnover, is somewhere in between oil industry and commercial industry.
Второй момент, который связан с наукометрическими базами, связан с таким процессом, как шоутизация и карнавализация науки.
The second aspect, which is related to scientometric basis, is related to making a science some kind of a show or a carnival, in quotation marks.
Я приведу одну историю, когда наш студенческий совет сделал исследование средств массовой информации в Запорожье и сделали рейтинг этих средств массовой информации и ведущих.
I would like to share a story when one of the colleagues, one of the students did make a research about the media and its rating in the city of Zaporozhye in Ukraine, where I reside.
Выборка была репрезентативна, и результаты мои студенты понесли на каждый телеканал.
So they made a certain sample of different media publications, and when they obtained the research results, the students of Professor Maxim Lepskiy took those results to those media and TV channels in the city.
И генеральный директор одного из наших местных каналов сказал: нет, мы лучше дадим вам время на рекламу, лишь бы вы не публиковали эти результаты. Вы перессорите всех ведущих.
And the general director of one of the TV channels said, "Oh, we are going to give you more time for commercials, but please do not publish the results of your research on the rating and different things, because our people that are working in this industry, they would have conflicts with each other."
Тогда мои студенты впервые осознали, что те, кто определяет рейтинг, во многом управляет сферой.
And at that moment, my students realized that rating itself, to a large extent, is managed simply by specific people. It is not like the way it is, in fact.
Следующим моментом, который связан с наукометрическими базами и цитированием, связан с тем, что хитмейкеры, создатели смыслов, потом подражания этим смыслам, не всегда соответствуют науке в значении решения задач.
So the next point about scientometrics basis and citing is that people that create a certain model or paramount model that people should adhere to, that model usually doesn't correspond to the way it should be, and it doesn't correspond to the way tasks should be solved in the first place.
Декарта, Исаака Ньютона, Лейбница, их ценили не только за то, что это были интересные концепции, но и за то, что они могли решать задачи, которые стояли перед государством.
For instance, when we speak about scientists, the great scientists such as Descartes, Newton, Leibniz, they were famous and they were accepted at a certain point of time, not because their conceptions or notions were interesting, but also because their ideas and things that they did, they were beneficial for many people, for the society that they lived in. And on this point, Professor Maxim Lepskiy, please wrap up your conclusion in 1 minute, because the time.
Я уже завершаю. И исходя из этих вопросов, все-таки нужно уточнить, в каком направлении движется наука. Это наука шоутизации и последующее вхождение в гиперреальность, когда наука теряет свое значение и приближается к значению, о котором говорил уважаемый Александр Николаевич, к значению религии. Или же все-таки наука – это инструмент решения важнейших задач и проблем общества.
So on this point, I should tell that after considering all those aspects that I've spoken about, we should ask the question. I mean, the question is obvious. Where is science going? Is it taking a tendency of becoming a show? Is it, going faster into hyper reality? And as Professor Sahaidak has mentioned, it is turning almost into a religion, instead of science being a tool of effective task solving and bringing benefits to the society.
Я сторонник науки, которая решает задачи, но с удовольствием изучаю такие отклонения, которые связаны с первым подходом шаутизации и карнавализации науки. Спасибо за внимание.
Certainly, I am adherent of a science which is a perfect tool for task solving, but I am interested in researching the deviations when a science is brought to the shape of the carnivalization or showitization. Thank you for your attention. And the discussion is going to be continued by Professor Sahaidak, please.
Так, ну что ж, продолжая эту плодотворную дискуссию по поводу наукометрических баз, их значимости в науке.
So I'm going to continue this very interesting discussion about scientometric databases and their relation to science.
Снова вспомним эту столь любимую нами фразу Леопольда Сонди о патологии и норме.
And again, once again, I would like to remind you this phrase of Leopold Sondy about the pathology and the norm.
И если мы расцениваем нынешнее состояние наукометрических баз как нечто не совсем нормальное,
and if we look at the cytometric databases right now in the modern situation, and we can say that this condition of these databases are not really normal,
зададимся вопросом, а что же является той нормой, которая лежала в основании этого процесса?
So we have to ask ourselves, what is the norm which was the base of this foundation of these scientometrics databases?
Если мы вспомним историю науки XIX века, мы поймем, что такой нормой была научная репутация.
And if we remind the science in the 19th century, if we remind the history of the science, we see that the norm of the science was the reputation.
Именно репутация в научном мире стало тем прототипом, на основе которого спустя 1,5 столетия возникло вот это вот здание нынешнее под названием наукометрические базы.
And exactly the reputation that was before became some kind of prototype, some kind of building which has the base in the past, but right now we have this building of the scientometric databases.
В научных сообществах репутация выполняла ту же функцию, что и во всех остальных сообществах. Это функции коммуникации и функции иерархизации.
And of course, when we talk about a science community, the reputation has a certain function, and this is the function of communication and the function of hierarchization.
Разумеется, нас в первую очередь интересует первая функция коммуникации.
And of course, we are interested with the first function, the function of communication.
И, конечно же, когда появилось цифровое общество, когда потоки научной информации возросли на порядки вследствие появления интернета.
And when we face the situation that right now we have actually a digital society and we have a lot of data and information in the digital world,
появилась потребность в новых, более эффективных способах коммуникации в научном сообществе.
So we face right now the situation where we need certain methods for communication in the scientific circles.
Такими методами и стали, надо признаться, достаточно интересные кибернетические вот эти разработки, которые мы сейчас называем наукометрические базы.
And one of these methods is actually, we can say that this is some kind of cybernetic developments, and this is what I mean is cytometric database.
Но как только они появились, сразу же стало понятно, что вторую функцию, функцию иерархизации, они выполняют еще лучше, чем коммуникация.
And at the moment when these cytometric databases at the moment when we have these databases, we understood that they have also the second function about hierarchization, and this function is much more better by these databases than the first one.
Оказалось, что при помощи наукометрических баз можно очень эффективно и как бы не очень-то заметно создавать круг допущенных и недопущенных.
And also we see the situation that actually with the help of these cytometric databases, one can very effectively create some circle of admitted scientists and not admitted scientists.
Ну и естественно, у кого бы поднялась рука расстаться с таким эффективным инструментом власти?
And of course, if one has a very specific and effective power tool, he never gives it to somebody.
Что мы сейчас и наблюдаем? Наукометрические базы превратились в инструмент управления, который действует в соответствии с вот этой вот тенденцией, замеченной, открытой, замечательным социологом Робертом Михельсом «Железный закон олигархии».
And what we see right now, that these scientometric databases, they become some kind of the tool of control these scientific circles. And this was some kind of discovery by Robert Michelson, who made the work named Железный закон олигархии, Iron Law of Oligarchism.
И надо сказать, что с задачами олигархизации науки наукометрические базы справляются великолепно.
And we have to pay attention that when we speak about the task about oligarchization, we see that these databases, they do it very well.
Поэтому для того, чтобы вернуть наукометрическим базам их основную функцию, функцию коммуникации, здесь, по моему мнению, требуется именно политическое решение.
And that's why if we talk about how to return the main function of these databases, and I speak about the function of communication, we had to understand that here we need some help from the political side.
И я в данном случае имею в виду не государственную политику, а те процессы власти и самоорганизации, которые происходят в самом научном сообществе.
And right now I speak not about the state politics, but I speak about the politics about self-organization in the scientific circles.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Sahaidak, for your speech and for being on time as usual. And the discussion is going to be continued by Professor Skvorets. Профессор Скворец.
Уважаемые коллеги, благодарю за предоставленное слово.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Конечно, после выступления профессора Lepskого и вот предыдущего выступающего, Sahaidak, да, которые так глубоко раскрыли социальную природу этих наукометрических баз, ну, в общем-то, сложно удивить чем-то присутствующих здесь.
And I want to say that after my colleagues, Professor Lepskiy and Professor Sahaidak, which revealed the social nature of these databases, it's very hard to say something new about this.
Я считаю, убежден в том, что вот это требование к ученым, обязательной публикации в журналах, которые входят в базы наукометрических данных Scopus и Web of Science, имеют весьма отдаленное отношение к науке.
And I personally believe that this requirement for scientists that they need to do publications in these cytometric databases such as Scopus or Web of Science, I think that it has nothing to do with the science.
Деятельность этих структур наукометрических баз, она имеет весьма противоречивый характер. Во-первых, деперсонализированная, во-вторых, забюрократизированная, и в-третьих, коммерциализированная.
And talking about the activity of these databases structures, I can see that it has very contradictory nature, and I speak about bureaucracy, depersonalization of it, and also financing side of this.
Мы не можем быть уверены в том, что те статьи, которые предоставляют авторы, рецензируются солидными учеными, авторитетными учеными, которые способны дать адекватную оценку этим научным исследованиям.
And we are not sure that all these articles in these databases are reviewed by very good scientists who are authorities in this field and that can really make evaluation of these works.
Действительно, чтобы статья попала в такой журнал, это требует огромных усилий и финансовых средств, и притом часто статьи не очень высокой научной ценности, иногда даже сомнительной научной ценности, легко попадают в такие журналы, а те научные изыскания, которые действительно заслуживают внимания, попасть туда не могут.
And I also want to share my opinion that when we speak about these articles that you want to publish in this database, it's very hard to do it because of the financial resources and because of the efforts that it's needed. And at the same time, sometimes we see the situation that some articles which are not very high scientific, not very professional, they published very easily in these databases.
Ну, я лично имел опыт, когда разработанная мною с коллегами статья, в которой действительно имелись и теоретические разработки, и нацеленные на практическое осуществление технологий, связанной с организацией и судейством дебатной деятельности. Ну, в общем-то, они интересны, они проверены практикой, используются на практике. Побывали в нескольких психологических журналах, которые входят в базы Scopus, но ни в одном журнале интереса к этому не проявили, и мы потеряли 1,5 года безрезультатно.
And I want to share my personal experience when we made a very good article with my colleagues about theoretical developments and some practical activity that can be used by somebody about subatomic activity. And we lost almost 2 years to try and to make some kind of publishing in these databases, but we could not do it, and we just lost this 1.5 of the year.
Мне известно несколько случаев, когда ученые, коллеги подавали в такие журналы статьи, платили огромные деньги, там, 8-10 тысяч гривен, а потом оказывалось, что это оказывались их статьи в фейковых журналах, и фактически, в общем-то, их научные разработки в эти данные, в эти журналы не попадали, я имею в виду наукометрические базы.
And I also know some different stories from my colleagues who made certain articles. They paid a lot of money in order to publish this article in cytometric databases, in special journals for this, and they spent many amount of money, some kind of 10,000 grivnas, which is about $500. But at the end, they found that their articles were published in some fake magazines. And this is very sad.
В связи со сказанным мною у меня возникает вопрос. А действительно ли эти базы наукометрических данных способствуют развитию науки?
And talking about all these stories and my experience, I have a question. Is it really so that these cytometric databases actually develop the science?
Я думаю, что скорее наоборот. Такая деятельность этих баз, она препятствует развитию науки. Она блокирует деятельность, препятствует деятельности ученых, которые действительно реально трудятся, имеют реальные достижения. И больше способствует тем, кто действительно финансово обеспечен, но далек от науки.
And I personally think that the situation is opposite. Such activity of these databases is not about development of science, but it's actually something that blocks activity of good scientists who work hard and who has some achievements. And at the same time, it's these databases, they promote some very low qualified scientists. Who has money?
Эти базы, их деятельность, она, по сути дела, часто обесценивает наших ученых отечественных и их достижения.
And I also want to share my opinion that this activity of these cytometric databases devalues the works of our scientists, Ukrainian scientists.
Представьте ученого, который создал научную школу, несколько там докторов наук, десяток кандидатов наук, и которая творчески работает, но вот эти условия резко изменилось, и получается, что творчество и результат научной деятельности этого ученого уже ничего не стоят, обесценились, потому что они в этих базах.
And just imagine the situation when there is a bunch of good scientists who has scientific schools. They are doctors of sciences, they are candidates, they work very hard and creatively. But at some point, the condition have changed, and all the results that have these scientists just not has value anymore because of these databases.
И последнее. Вот деятельность этих баз, она, вы знаете, разрушает ту традицию отношения к науке ученых, которая сложилась в нашем обществе. Та традиция, о которой сегодня упоминали, которую закладывали еще Алексей Яковлев и Григорий Попов, то есть традиция деятельности ученого, которая направлена на решение проблем своего народа, своего общества, своего государства.
Thank you so much. And Professor Skvorets, as a conclusion, he says that this attitude of scientometric basis, they are basically messing up the whole tradition of science, which was established by our forefathers and by great scientists such as academician Yakovlev, academician Popov, when science was about actually solving tasks and making practical things that can be used for the benefit of the society, for the benefit of the nations, that would make people even better and stronger. And on this point, we have finished our really tough and I think difficult questions. And dear speakers, Dr. Lucien Oulahbib, Professor Maxim Lepskiy, Professor Sahaidak, and Professor Skvorets, thank you so much. Does anybody want to say a final word for 1 minute? Anybody wants to say a final word? Кто-нибудь хочет сказать заключительное слово на 1-2 минуты?
Было очень приятно обсудить с коллегами эту тему, и надеюсь, что мы еще встретимся и обсудим не менее значимые вопросы. И спасибо большое организаторам за прекрасное проведение.
Professor Maxim Lepskiy says that it was a pleasure for him to discuss this important topic with his colleagues on this panel, and he hopes that this is not the last meeting, that we will be meeting to discuss even more significant topics. He also thanks the organizing committee. Does anybody else want to say the final word?
Хочу присоединиться к мнению коллеги и отметить, что то, что мы осуществляем с вами сейчас, это вот те самые процессы самоорганизации в науке, которые имеют, как мы уже понимаем, не только познавательную, гносеологическую ценность, но и ценность политическую, если мы говорим о науке, как о сообществе, в котором идут процессы власти, и они должны быть конструктивными, для того, чтобы мы могли эффективно достигать нашей главной цели – познания истины.
And Professor Sahaidak says that he joins in his feelings with Professor Maxim Lepskiy, and he would like to make a final word telling that we know that the science itself is a certain self-organizational process. And what you colleagues and distinguished scholars have been doing during this panel also relates to that, you have been looking at the political side of the science, but not the political as the government, but the political part of the science of when it deals with the power and the role in the science of different actors. And this is also one more step which reminds us what is the science is about, which is the thirst for the truth and the knowledge. Thank you. Dr. Lucien Oulahbib, would you like to say a final word? We don't hear you, no?
Yes.
Please, go on.
No, not necessary, because I am agree with all colleagues about the necessity to concentrate our efforts to study and to become stronger And now, for instance, just when Professor Dr. Skvorets, Vladimir Skvorets said some colleagues give a lot of money to be published in the fake review. Yes, it's very sad to hear that. It's why it's necessary to build our own reviews, and maybe the final word is to say the balance between the true, the classic path to research the true, and to fight against the fake science, and don't be afraid to denounce some dominant ideology, to say no, it's not the science. I can challenge you if you want in the public sense. You have not to be in the shadow also. It's a balance of to fight in front of the public, and behind the scene also. It's a multifactorial challenge. If you want. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oulahbib. Thank you. Anybody else? No, this is it. Dear distinguished colleagues, thank you once again for participating in this very important panel. Since today Zoom is experiencing some bugs and problems not related to our side, but because of the technical part of the Zoom, this broadcast is going to be rebroadcasted later on the Granite of Science publication on Facebook, just in several hours. I would like to wish everyone amazing week. Thank you so much. And as usual, in several weeks, our organizing and scientific committee would be preparing a resolution and the collected papers book, and every speaker is going to be notified accordingly. Thank you so much for your time once again, and have a great evening. Bye.
Bye, bravo. Bye, bye.